This is Josh Bycer from GameWisdom.com. I hope you enjoyed this Critical Thought, your daily discussion on game design. Welcome to today's Critical Thought. As always, before we get going, thank you to currently 984 subscribers here on the YouTube channel. If you're enjoying the content, be sure to like and subscribe. As you can see, we are now getting very, very close to 1,000. Before we get going with the Critical Thought, got some good news and bad news to report. Good news is I got in touch with YouTube regarding the issue regarding editing some of these videos, and they got back to me. The bad news, it turns out, is that they're having a problem or doing something with the video editing software for videos that are over an hour in length, meaning that I can't edit them down using their editor at the moment. I'm hoping that this isn't some, big change on YouTube's part and this is just a simple bug on their end, but until that happens, it's going to affect me a little bit because I've recorded some major streams and major videos on PS4 and on Twitch that they will have to be edited separately. I also had a video ready to go up for Expeditions Viking, which unfortunately I'm going to have to reshoot now because I don't know when it's going to be fixed. But just want to give you guys a heads up on that one. But for today, we are going to be talking about something completely different. Final Fantasy. As you know, Final Fantasy 15 has been released about, I think, 2 or 3 weeks ago, just about from the time of this post, and Final Fantasy series is one of those very long-running series, and it always deserves to be mentioned here. To keep this from turning into a 2-3 hour video, we're going to mainly focus on the main branch, so Final Fantasy 1 through 15. But, love it or hate it, Final Fantasy has certainly made its impact on the game industry. It was released originally in 1987 by a small company called Squaresoft at the time, who decided to essentially throw a Hail Mary play at trying to copy the major RPG series at the time, which was Dragon Warrior, released in 1986, and my god, do I feel old right now. But Final Fantasy, of course, became sort of the foundation and the benchmark for the JRPG genre. And it's really quite interesting to track its growth and evolution over the last 15 games. Now, for those of you wondering if I'll play 15, unfortunately I couldn't get a press copy of the game at the moment, so unless there's a really big sale on it, I will have to wait. But when it comes to the series as a whole, it has done several major things that, love it or hate it, has certainly become a major foundation of both it and JRPG design. Now, what's interesting when we talk about Final Fantasy, starting with the first one, is that it really didn't. I guess the series really has evolved away from Final Fantasy 1. In the sense of the first game, there really wasn't a hero in the same sense as we saw with the subsequent titles. Instead, you built your own custom party, much like you would in a CRPG, like Dungeons & Dragons, Might and Magic, etc. And even though you could pick a variety of classes, I think most of us went with Fighter, Warrior, Black Mage, White Mage. It also had the concept of evolving characters, which happened, I think, halfway through. But the first game certainly established a lot of what will become the core foundation of it and of JRPG design. You have turn-based combat, heroes on one side, villains on the other, some great battle music. Some of those songs I think will be stuck in our heads until the end of time. And of course, wandering a very, very big world. It seems very quaint or weird to talk about JRPG design like today after we've all been exposed to it, but back then in the late 80s, we really didn't see too many of these games. Again, Dragon Warrior came out 1 year before it. And RPGs of this nature, they are open-ended in the sense that there isn't a strict, level 1, level 2, level 3, but they're designed to essentially have an organic process. You're going to explore the first continent, then you're going to go to a second continent. At some point, you're going to get some kind of airship, which will let you explore everywhere. And it's just about, again, growing your team out and going throughout this world. Now, with later Final Fantasies, especially starting with 2, we saw what would become the series' trademarks. A very big emphasis on storytelling and character development, which again, for its time, late 80s, it really was unheard of to have these very involved stories. for most of us, we got used to Metroid and Mario. Your princess is in another castle, and there's an alien, go kill it. So having these complex characters and dealing with issues of war and strife and political dealings was quite unique. Now, for the United States, we didn't get all the Final Fantasies, as it's infamously known. I think we got one, I want to say 3 or 4 here. I know we got Final Fantasy Mystic Quest, which I've pretty much have heard everyone say they hate that one. But the first really big Final Fantasy game, the one that kind of cemented its recognition in the industry, would be Final Fantasy 3 or 6 in Japan. This is the one that when people talk about the best Final Fantasy games or the best RPGs, Final Fantasy 6 is most likely going to be on that list. We have, for the first time, really a grand ensemble of characters. Everybody from Cid, Ceres, Locke, Terra, Shadow. Again, we could spend a few minutes naming them all. And what was interesting is each character had its own unique quirks or abilities. I think Setzer had like a jackpot system. Sabin had like, you had to input button commands to use his powers, and so on. There's also introduced Kefka. Again, it's for those of you who are primarily PC fans, these names are going to be hard enough for you to understand, but I'm sure there are some RPG fans who are getting ready to write some angry comments about how much I'm butchering their names. And with the Final Fantasy series, of course, 6 really laid that groundwork for this massive story, amazing music, and I think that's always been a staple of the Final Fantasy series. The combat system has certainly changed and evolved, which is actually a very interesting point about what's good and bad about Final Fantasy, and that is that it's one of the few franchises in the game industry that's an anthology, meaning that each game essentially is its own self-contained thing. Even though it's called Final Fantasy, and we got 15 main branch games, each game really is separate. It features different characters, different locales, and even as we got later in with the from I think like 7, 8 on, they have featured different takes on its combat systems. Final Fantasy 15 has probably been one of the most radical, and probably second to that would be Final Fantasy 12. Now, this is both good and bad about Final Fantasy. On one hand, this pretty much allows them to keep things fresh. Whenever you go into a new Final Fantasy game, you just really don't know what to expect. Yes, we're going to expect fighting monsters, usually some kind of JRPG battle, but everything else from its mechanics and its overarching storyline, it's completely up for grabs. And this has led to some very interesting games. Like we said, Final Fantasy VI really became one of the best known games. Final Fantasy VII was kind of the game that not only cemented the series, but the PlayStation as being major impacts on game development. And of course we have Final Fantasy XII, which completely redid the combat and everything that we knew to focus more on this like pseudo MMO like take. The downside, of course, is that it also makes it very tricky to follow the series. Again, with each game being its own separate thing, this isn't the same thing as other franchises, where you know if you like one game, you're going to most likely like number 2, 3, 4, etc. If I play Assassin's Creed, I know I'm going to like Assassin's Creed 2, Uncharted, Grand Theft Auto, Mario, Zelda, you name it. But in Final Fantasy, each game really operates under its own set rules, which means that you're really going into it at 0 for the most part. Final Fantasy, the jump between Final Fantasy 12 and 13 was massive. On the other side of that, it also makes it very hard if you really enjoy one game and then they just completely, tear apart the systems for the next one. This has also been a major reason why the Final Fantasy games take such a long time to be developed. They're usually, I think, like 3 to 4 years of development, maybe a little bit more than that. And there is a greater talk here, and this is a major topic we need to talk about in a separate critical thought. But it's the idea that it is infinitely harder to build a game from an engine and programming standpoint at the same time you're building the design and the mechanics. And there is definitely not enough time to get into that for today's critical thought. But keep that in the back of your mind, because we will have to return to that. But when it comes to Final Fantasy, the problem with the Final Fantasy series is that they basically, again, start at zero with each new game, from a storytelling perspective, from an art perspective, from basically everything that they did in the last game gets almost razed to the ground. And this has led to some groundbreaking games, but has also led to this fact that you really don't know what to expect quality-wise from a Final Fantasy title. Sometimes we get some amazing games. Other times they have become quite polarizing, such as in Final Fantasy 12 and 13's case. 12, for instance, I think I mentioned this before, that was the last Final Fantasy game I really played because I heard all the Final Fantasy fans hated that one, and that made me check it out. But I think that's a good point to segue into this. The other side of Final Fantasy as a long-running franchise is the fact that it has gone to influence JRPG design, for better and for worse. There are a lot of very annoying elements that have been a part of Final Fantasy pretty much since the beginning. The pacing of the series has probably been one of the most criticized elements, thanks to the requirement of random encounters, because they're the only ways to level up your characters and get the strength needed to take on the boss. This leads to a lot of dead time in Final Fantasy, where you are just going around killing enemies. But the problem is that it gets in the way of the storytelling. And we've all heard the jokes about the Final Fantasy story and how there's a bad guy who's going to destroy all life as we know it, but you still have time to do a beauty pageant, or race chocobos, or do that blitzball game from Final Fantasy X. And this kind of off-kilter pacing has become almost like a standard of JRPG design for a lot of the games. And in the Final Fantasy series, it can really get in the way for those of you who really enjoy the storytelling. Imagine reading a book where there's a 10% chance every time you turn the page that you'll be forced to jog for 5 minutes before you can read the next page. It just completely upsets the flow, especially when you're just trying to get through to the story. Now, the other part about Final Fantasy is that the combat has certainly become a much heated debate, and honestly, we could easily turn that into another critical thought. But there are a lot of elements of Final Fantasy's combat systems that just really don't work. They're designed around these massive encounters, but they're needlessly complicated, or needlessly feature-filled for regular fights. We've talked about this before with how you have all these different debuffs and stats affecting skills, but they are useless for the most part, because of the fact that the regular enemies die too fast, and the bosses are immune to them all. And of course, there's the argument over these summons, and how you have these multi-minute animations where you're just sitting there watching, something explode and all kinds of crazy stuff happening. And this kind of design is what really actually led to me falling out of the JRPG genre. I think it was like around the time of Final Fantasy IX, I want to say. And it wasn't until I started playing Shin Megami Tensei again that sort of brought me back to it. But we start talking about Shin Megami Tensei in a Final Fantasy talk, and we'll be here all night. But Final Fantasy, again, love it or hate it, has become a major institution of the game industry. It led to Squaresoft surviving, and of course having one of the most grammatically incorrect franchises with Final Fantasy X, 11, 12, and you get it. It also led to, of course, the development of Square Enix, where Squaresoft and Enix, who are once heated competitors, combined forces. Final Fantasy, as we said, has also influenced a whole lot of JRPGs that have been released. My goodness, my mind is blanking because there's just so many. Legend of Legaia, Chrono Trigger, of course. Not really Persona, that was still based on Shin Megami. Robotech. Oh my goodness. Really, there's just so many that my brain is emptied out on them. And I'm sure for those of you watching, you can probably think of a few dozen yourself. But let's end things here. Final Fantasy, of course, is still very much going strong. And it's kind of interesting to see how the series has really become more action or ARPG focus over the last few entries. Again, Final Fantasy XII brought in more real-time combat and more of a, I'm not sure how to describe it, like I think pretty much like an MMO style take, similar to Xenoblade Chronicles, which I really enjoyed that game, but again, that's a 15-minute talk right there. For those of you watching this, what do you think about Final Fantasy? And I know my fan base, especially for those of you, the regulars here, I know most of you are most likely PC gamers. Now, they've been releasing or slowly but surely bringing Final Fantasy's back catalog to the PC. I'm wondering, for those of you who are PC gamers, have you had a chance to play Final Fantasy, and what do you think of the franchise? There's always been that very interesting debate over East meets West or JRPG versus CRPG design. But at this point, it could pretty much be a drinking game. We need to save that for another critical thought. But once again, thank you so much for watching. For you first-timers, if you're enjoying things, be sure to like and subscribe and all that great stuff. Once again, I'm Josh Bycer from GameWisdom.com, where we examine the art and science of games. Thanks for watching today's Critical Thought, and check back tomorrow for more great content here and on Game Wisdom. Take care. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoy it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and of course share with your friends. It always helps out. For daily posts on all manner of game design and industry topics, check out game-wisdom.com. To support the site and everything that I do, be sure to check out the Patreon campaign. If we can hit goals, it will mean more content for everyone to enjoy, and I'll be able to support myself and my household. If you want to follow me, you can find me on Twitter at GWBycer for updates throughout the day and random thoughts from me. And lastly, you can find me on Twitch right over there at GWBycer for daily streams most nights around 10 Eastern. Thanks again for watching the video, and be sure to check out more great content coming to the Game Wisdom channel real soon.